OK, we heard what psychologists think. Mr. Vöpel, how much psychology is there actually to this?
Well, a lot. A bubble is driven by expectations of future increases in prices, and that leads to actual increases in prices and thereby fueling the inflating of a bubble.
So it is really just the basic economic question of supply and demand.
Exactly, but it's driven by cheap money, by expectations, not justified by real factors, by fundamental factors. And at a specific point of time, the bubble is going to be bursting, and then the market is crashed.
But also driven by people trying to make a quick buck.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is fueled by cheap monies, by low interest rates, and by expectation of further price increases.
Well, let's take a look at some of the numbers before and after a property bubble bursts. Spain, for example, it was going through a mighty construction boom, and housing prices were already high, but they got ridiculous at one stage. Then the bubble burst in 2008, throwing millions of Spaniards out of work. It created an economic crisis of its own. And prior to that, the US subprime mortgage mess, it created a global financial crisis. I mean, these are things that are happening over and over again. We heard about the example back 400 years ago in the Netherlands. Have we learned nothing?
It seems so, because it's very difficult to learn from a crisis individually. We can collectively learn from a crisis, and this must lead to a better regulation of financial markets.
And is this where it all comes back to the psychology of things? Because we all expect everything's just going to get better. We all expect we're going to earn more. Prices are going to keep rising.
That's the human nature, I would say. And it's hardly and nearly impossible to predict when a bubble is bursting. And so it's reinventing itself, and we can never say when it will be bursting.
OK, so we can't do anything about the predictions, but what can we do to prevent it? Or at least shore ourselves up economically or financially?
Well, what we have done in the recent time is that or the crisis was fueled by cheap money in the beginning of the 2000 years, and now we want to fight the crisis by cheap money again. And this could lead to further bubbles bursting in 5 or 10 years, and that is the fear or the threat of the market right now.
Who's pushing for all that cheap money, though? It's politicians, isn't it?
Politicians, exactly. The central banks who provide cheap money at low interest rates, and institutional investors are searching for yield and going into risk, and that could imply that they also investing in a kind of a bubble.
Because I don't want to play the blame game here, but you know, we're not really to blame. It's the politicians setting the rules and making up regulations, and they do try to heavily regulate so many of these industries, don't they?
I think they should do, because there's no individual learning from a bubble. Because, as you have mentioned before, we have a bubble from time to time over many centuries, and that we obviously can't learn from a bubble. So we must regulate these markets.
OK, Mr. Vöpel, thank you very much for the analysis. Good to have you on Made in Germany.
You're welcome.